Good
Good
morning.
morning.
How you
Good
doing?
morning. How are you this morning, Rodney?
I am wonderful. I am wonderful, nice and toasty. Cup of coffee in hand. Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the This Way Network
Yeah.
chat session. It's me, Rodney Allen Rippey, and Nina.
Yay. And we've
Yay!
got a salute to Memorial Day.
That's right.
Yeah.
To all
Yeah.
of our wonderful, blessed military out there from around the world, thank
Mhm.
you. Many, many thank you to their families, the people who sacrificed, who made it possible for us to have our freedoms.
Mhm.
Um, so many people do not know how wonderful it is to be here in the United States. And some
Mhm.
understand that, but don't kind of go through the process to get here. And so I think that might be a kind of topic for today, kind of, sort of,
Well,
in
in
part.
part, but
There you
actually
go.
what prompted some of this topic, and we're calling it Great Mystery, because what I discovered is that to a lot of our
Mhm.
population, less than half of the people surveyed in a recent survey understood what Memorial Day is celebrating.
Wow. Very powerful. Very powerful.
Less than half. So I thought, maybe we should try to take some of the mystery out of that for most of the population
Sounds
and
good.
help people understand what it's about, where it came from, why we do
Mhm.
it.
Yep.
And in the same article, I also read that the majority, and they didn't give a percentage on this, but they just said the
Mhm.
majority of our citizens could not
Mhm.
pass the test that naturalized citizens have to take to become a citizen.
That's right. That's right.
So
It's
I thought, oh, what we don't know, that's terrible.
yeah,
So
and you seem like a history buff.
yes, I do love history, but I
I
also love
do.
knowing um,
Mhm.
understanding what principles our country was founded on and why we
Sure.
do things the way we do.
That's right. That's right.
So, and the value in that. So, I love sharing that with people too. And I discovered that there is actually a textbook
Mm.
that naturalized citizens get to study.
Mhm.
It tells you all about, the
Yeah.
things that are going to be covered in the test, the things that they feel like you need to know. This is general information, general knowledge that you need to know about the United States, its history, how it operates today, etc., for you
Mm.
to be a good citizen here. And
Interesting.
I thought,
Interesting.
if a lot of our general population who's been born here don't know that information, because Rodney, I think they're not teaching civics
That's
in a
what
lot of schools
I was getting ready to
anymore.
ask you. Do you think
Mhm.
that should be a topic that is across the board in elementary school and definitely high school?
Oh, yeah. And it used to be. I don't know what happened where it went by the wayside, but in the state I live in
Mhm.
Alabama, and
Mhm.
you could not pass high school. You couldn't get your diploma if you had
Mhm.
taken at least 1 semester of civics.
You know what?
It was required.
I was in high school in North Carolina, and I think I do recall us having to have some kind of a we did have some questions about that. In
Mhm,
North Carolina, it was, you know, I it was different from California. I was born in California. I spent 8 years in North Carolina before coming back here to go to college, but,
mhm,
um, in those 8 years, there were things that just was outrageous. I mean, I remember when I got to junior high school, this is true. No, no, no. When I got to high school in the 10th grade, and we had a middle school and then we had the high school right next door. So you can go to
mhm,
Southeast Middle School, then you went to the high school. The day I got to the high school, which I never really thought about it because when you're in middle school, you're riding the bus and you never see the high school. So when I
mhm,
got to the high school, right when the hunting season started, I realized I was sitting in class one day and looked out the window and I was like, are those rifles hanging in the back windows? So some of the guys who
mhm,
went to high school, 10th, 11th, or 12th graders who were driving,
mhm,
these guys used to back their trucks up instead of pulling them in, they would back
mhm,
up and there were these 3 guys and they would have their gun gun racks, and they would have two 12 gauges, and I mean, in their vehicle. And I,
Mhm.
some
Mhm.
said, "Do you see them guns out there?" And they were like, "Oh, Rodney, ain't no big thing. They just hunting." And I'm like, "But couldn't they left the guns at home before they came to school?" And they were like, "Oh man, Rodney," believe it or not, I mean, I instantly caught up on that, and I was thinking, and I was, you know, but it sent a real strong message to me that I was like, boy, things that I told people, I said, if that would not fly in California, if they seen guns,
Oh, yeah.
but it was like cool. It was really
Yeah.
cool. And
Yeah, all over the South it's like that because a lot of people hunt around here, it's a big thing. They hunt for deer, they hunt for boar, they you know
I know,
yeah.
but I'm like during school hours, I was like,
But, when I was growing up, and
yeah,
I'm older than you,
no, I don't believe it. I don't
but
believe it.
yeah,
Don't believe.
yeah,
Go
I am.
ahead.
I'm older than you, but still, I'm not that far removed from
No,
you.
of course,
So
no,
when
no.
I was growing up, the guys who hunted, believe it or not, a lot of times they just kept their gun on that rack in their truck. 'Cause
Right.
they were like, "I might wanna go hunting when I get out of school. I might go hunting before I go to school in the morning, get up super early and do a little hunting before I go to school." So they just kept the gun in the rack.
Okay. Okay, I
I know
understand
that
that.
sounds a little crazy, but that's how
No, no, it's
that's
not
how much
crazy.
they loved hunting and how
I'm
dedicated to it they were. And they were like, "Well, I gotta have my gun with me, and I'm not
right.
going home for it, so if I'm gonna,
Yeah,
in
I
the
guess.
daylight." That's
Again,
yeah.
I'm not opposed to gun ownership, not at all, because I grew up in a home, my dad hunted, my dad had guns, dad had
Mhm.
handguns, and, the whole thing is, I just, sometimes I mean, I guess it's a different day and age. I mean, back when,
Mhm.
you were younger, back when I was younger, it seemed that people were like, "Well, I'm not gonna do that." Nowadays, people are like, "Oh, I'm gonna do that," whatever it
Mhm.
is, and
Mhm.
I think that is where the problem has kicked in, and plus, sensible gun ownership, people with stable minds and stuff. The problem is, it isn't guns, it's people with unstable minds with guns. That is the problem.
True,
That
true.
I don't care what nobody says, that's the problem. Unstable people, people who come unhinged, people who are easily upset, people who have an axe to grind with innocent people. That's a
Mhm.
problem. That's where
You
the
know
problem kicks in.
yeah, and I was just this is something you just made me think of. I saw
Yep.
this in an article recently where they were
Mhm.
talking about 100% of the school shooters, people who have walked into a school and, shot people or whatever, or been students there and brought a gun and ended up doing that.
Yeah.
100% of them were on some kind of antidepressant or medication for mental illness. But the thing is, the medicine that they're taking, this one of the major side effects of it, especially if you try to get off of it, is ideations of suicide
Wow.
and harming other people.
Okay. Wow.
So
I
it kind of
mean,
leaves you going, okay, somebody's having some mental health issues. Are we really treating them the best way possible?
right,
Is
right,
is there another alternative besides this? Because this seems to drive them a little further in the
yeah,
wrong direction under the
right.
wrong conditions.
You're right.
Just saying. Yeah. So, and not saying that we should, ban all those medications or anything, just saying that there might be a better way. Maybe we should look for that. But anyway, having said all that, do you know what Memorial Day was called before it was Memorial Day?
Wow, I don't. I remember you hit me with a good trivia question, but tell me, share it with me.
All right. Well, I'm going to give
Share
the
it with
people in
us. Yeah.
our viewers a chance.
Mhm.
Anybody out there
Yeah.
know? So Chloe, Carrie, Elvira, do any of you know what Memorial Day was called before it was called Memorial Day? So if
Mm.
you do, put it in the comments. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I'll circle back around to that.
Mhm.
But I'm going to give you a clue by telling
Okay.
you how Memorial Day used to be celebrated here, even
Remem
before it was a Memorial Day. Here in the
re
South, I
Remembrance
think,
Day?
okay, that's good. In some places, it may have been called that. But in most places, it was
Uh-huh.
called Decoration Day.
Decoration Day.
Now, why would it be called Decoration Day? And this is
'Cause
where I
you
want
wanna
to tell you,
Uh-huh.
because you what?
Put up flags.
So you would put up flags, yes, but
Okay.
the way it actually started in the
Uh-huh.
US at least, it was after the Civil War,
Right.
and families wanted to remember their fallen soldiers from their family. So
Of
they
course.
would go they had a set day every year, everybody
Mhm.
did it, and they would go to the cemetery and decorate
Oh.
the graves with flowers and flags
Hey,
as their way of
colorism.
honoring the dead. That's right. They decorated the graves of the
Oh,
veterans, the
okay.
ones who had passed on before. So,
Alright.
and here in the South, now I
Mhm.
don't have a vivid memory of this myself,
Mhm.
sort of, but not a very vivid memory. But what I'm told by people who are a little older than me was
Mhm.
that here in the South, one of the things that people did was, they're going to honor Uncle Ed, who is
Right.
lying in the cemetery. He
Right.
fell in one of the wars, and so they want to honor him. They would all dress up in their Sunday best,
Mhm.
because that's how you honor people.
Right.
Is you dress up to say you're
Right.
worth me showing this kind of respect and honor to. They would
Right.
all dress up. They would pack a picnic lunch.
Right.
They would gather flowers,
Around. Right.
from around their house or whatever they had growing or out in the field or whatever. They would gather flowers.
Uh-huh.
They would all go to the cemetery and they would meet their neighbors there.
Oh, wow.
And
Interesting.
all of them would go around with those armloads of flowers, not just decorating the graves of their own fallen
Decorate.
dead, but
Okay. Okay.
of their neighbors. And especially, is there
Wow.
anyone who all their family is gone or doesn't live here anymore? Or, we don't want them to be forgotten either. We remember their sacrifice. And so they would decorate all the graves. And
Beautiful.
then they would spread out a picnic lunch
Right.
and they would all eat together and they would talk about those who were fallen, you
Hmm.
know, remembering them, who they used to be, what they were like,
Right.
what their hobbies were, what they believed in,
Okay.
and what kind of smile they had. They would do all of that on Decoration Day. And I
Decoration Day.
think that's
Okay.
kind of the beginnings right there, the getting together and sharing a meal together and so forth. That was the beginnings of what we end up doing now on Memorial Day, which is kind of getting together for a cookout or whatever, but get the family together because you got the day
Right.
off. And
Mhm.
but too often now we don't remember what the day started out to be about and who it started out to be about.
Right. Right.
So we don't think of those who went before us and paid that
Mhm.
ultimate sacrifice.
Wow.
And so some people know, oh, well, yeah, it's the fallen soldiers and they were um, fighting for our freedoms. And then you
Right.
ask them, okay, well, what freedoms were they fighting for? And all of a sudden there's silence, or they might say, for me to be able to have a barbecue on Memorial Day. And,
No.
like,
Right.
no, I don't
Not
think
quite.
they fought for something quite that,
Mhm.
um, I don't know
Right. Yeah.
anybody who would go out and fight for your right to have a barbecue on a particular day
No.
and
Mm-mm.
possibly lose their life,
Right.
you know?
Right.
So I think that's what Decoration Day was. It was the beginnings of all of that, and eventually it was brought to Congress and requested that we make this an official holiday because this is what we do as Americans, and so we want it to be codified. And
Mhm.
Congress said, "All right," but they named it Memorial Day because they were remembering the fallen soldiers.
Mhm.
Um, and they recognize some people may not have people in their
Right.
family who are fallen,
Yeah.
who were among those in the
I
cemetery. So, but
I'm very
we still
fortunate.
want them to remember their neighbors that way.
I'm very fortunate. My uncles, and I had an Uncle Sam Robbins. God bless him. He passed away
Mhm,
a number of years ago, but he was a military man. My first cousin, Clay Rippey,
mhm.
he was in the Navy. I think he did almost 25 years in the Navy. And so
Wow.
salute to Cuz and all the other veterans out there. I've been very fortunate to have worked in many veterans. There's another gentleman who we had on, BJ Douglas. BJ Douglas,
Mhm, mhm,
he is a veteran, and all shout out to all the guys over at US Vets and all of the
mhm.
amazing organizations. Wow, you know what? If I would have thought, I would have grabbed this information. I was at Vet. It was at Vet. I was at Vet Center. Yeah, I went to Vet Center in, gosh, that was in Palmdale, Lancaster, and they actually have a building where it's in a community, and it's very wonderful because all of the veterans can go there for services, mental health,
Mhm.
housing, job resources. Everything was all. They actually invited me to an event. I couldn't make it, but I plan to connect with them on the next event. And I mean, and you
Mhm.
know, Memorial Day in honor of our military and those who sacrifice, this is an important day. It really is.
Mhm.
It's beyond
Yeah.
barbecues and hanging out.
Yes, yes. And I think it's important that now we don't wanna get Memorial Day confused with Veterans Day, and
Right. That's
sometimes people do that, they think they're kinda synonymous with each other, and they're just
right.
kinda like bookends that,
Mhm.
"Oh, well, this is before the summer, this is at the end of the summer."
Yeah.
No, that's not the idea either. But Veterans Day is to honor our military. The
Mhm.
people who serve in our military, but Memorial Day is to honor those who died while they were
Mhm.
serving in our
That's right.
military. So,
Mhm.
to honor the sacrifice they made. But I tell you, Rodney, I think a great way to do that
Mhm.
is to go seek out some veterans, because
Right.
most of the veterans have friends that fell beside them and that
That's
they
right.
still remember and that they're still grieving
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
And maybe to go to those veterans and say,
Mhm.
"Thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Tell me about the buddies
Yeah.
that you fought with and that you fought for." Because in the end, this is what I've heard soldiers say, is that in the end, when you're on the battlefield, you're not thinking about all those freedoms. Maybe you enlisted
No.
to
No.
help preserve those freedoms, but when you're on the battlefield, all you're thinking about is trying to help protect the guy next to you.
That's
The
true.
soldier next to you who's serving, or if he's wounded, get him off the battlefield or get him some help, or
Mhm.
that's what it's all about. And then
Mhm.
they do. It's very hard to deal
Yeah.
with when they see their friend who just a few hours before,
Right.
maybe they were playing cards with, or they were having a serious discussion about life with, or maybe
Right.
that friend was showing them photos of their
Mhm.
family back at home.
Mhm.
Here's my wife, here's my daughter.
Mhm.
And then all
Also
of a sudden now he's lying dead at your feet.
also
That's very traumatic.
Also, a dear friend of mine, Don Ward. Don Ward, I think he's been on with
Mhm.
us too, and he was a military man. He was in Vietnam, and my first cousin, Wayne Garner, he was in
Mhm.
Vietnam, and Wayne told me stories that were really, I mean, I can understand why these men and women went through so much, and when they came home, and I really believe our veterans do not receive the proper care that they deserve, especially for all the
Mhm.
sacrifice. And especially when you talk about the guys that went to Vietnam, because my cousin told me a story that
Mhm.
when he was going into recruitment, he met this guy. And then when they went to boot camp, there he was. And so they started talking and they became friends. So they met when they were signing up and they thought they'd never see each other again, but they ended up in the same platoon. And so
Mhm.
they made a pact together that they were going to get home. They go, listen, if we don't do anything else, you have to get me home. I have to get you home. And they made a pact. And they said that
Mhm.
they were like side by side, literally side by side everywhere they went. And he's like, you get me home, I get you home. And it was so
Mhm.
powerful, the story that he told. And he told me this years ago. And I was like, wow, this could be a movie, literally, because to make that story come to life, and I'm thinking, but it's even beyond cinematic, forces of it. But he was telling me that they had to run through a clearing, and they were like literally surrounded, and
Mhm.
there were trees, and there was like a 50 yards that you had to run through. And so my cousin said, I'm going to run through and you lay down fire over me, just spray
Mhm.
over top of me because
Mhm.
I'm running straight across. And then when I get on the other side, I'm going to lay down fire for you and you
Mhm.
come across. And the guy goes, no, I'm going to go first. He goes, no, let me go first. And the guy goes, no, I'm going. And he takes off. And he says, well, he told me, he said, if you take off, don't stop running. He goes, I don't care
Mhm.
what. He goes, when you run, don't stop. Run, do not stop. And the guy started running and he stopped halfway and looked to see if my cousin was behind him. That's how much he cared about my cousin. And he said a hand grenade came, and he was,
Mm.
he was blown up. And he said, and my cousin saw that. That was his guy. That was his. And so my cousin he had some pretty hard, times about that. And he told me that that was his moment because he said he saw it. And so he knew he was gone. And then the next thing was he said I had to run right through that same area, right
Mhm.
past it. And he said I had to keep going. And so I was like, so you think of all of the men and women who've been a part of
Mhm.
not only Vietnam and all the rest of it's a very traumatizing experience. And a
Mhm.
lot of these
Mhm.
men were young. I've heard people,
Yes.
somebody just telling me yesterday that their their uh their husband was 17. He lied and he wasn't even 18 yet, and he was already in at 17.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think about the young people today, and I'm thinking, would any of our young people go, oh, I'm going to the military? Especially, you know, when things are
Mhm.
in the heat of battle. And I'm like, whew, I
Mhm.
mean, something to think
But
about.
and actually recruitment is up right now. It's
Yeah,
been at a historic low for the
right.
last several years, but it is, actually seems to be rocketing back up.
Well,
So
that's a
that's,
good thing.
encouraging in a way. I did want to mention,
Mhm.
not all of our fallen soldiers fall on the battlefield.
That's true.
Some of them become wounded and end
Yeah,
up dying of those injuries soon after. Some of them die of those injuries, but not for many years.
and some have what they call service connected, meaning and matter of fact, I know people who were in Vietnam, and they succumbed from things because
Mhm.
they were exposed to certain chemicals.
Yes,
And
like Agent
that
Orange.
yeah,
Mhm.
and sadly, my cousin told me, matter of fact, I asked him, I said, "Cuz," I said, "They told me about napalm. Was that real?" He goes, "Oh, let me tell you something." He said that was some of the he said, "You did not wanna be around." It was like he said it was like whatever the stuff was like a gel, and it
Mhm.
ignited, and when it
Mhm.
came in and the bomb exploded, it was like it threw fire. It set everything on fire in its path. And he goes, if you
Mhm.
were near it and any of that stuff got on, he goes, it was just, and I was just like, oh my goodness. And I just couldn't imagine. And so everybody, when they would hear the planes coming in, everybody was on high alert. And I was like,
Mhm.
ooh,
Mhm.
I couldn't imagine the stress, but
Yeah, I couldn't
whew,
either. And, but, that's another point to make there because our soldiers go through so much trauma and
mhm,
so much stress that
mhm,
many of them, after they get home and they're remembering, they
yeah,
can't stop thinking about the buddy who fell right next to them or they watched him get blown up just feet away from
yeah,
him. And they
yeah, that,
come home and the grief is so great, they end up
mhm,
committing suicide. The
yeah,
rate of suicide is highest in our military than in any other population
that's right. That's
in the
right.
United
And
States. And even
yeah,
those soldiers, I think, deserve to be honored
Mm-hmm.
because they
They
too
certainly did.
came away with scars. They may not have been physical scars or something that
Mhm.
took their life physically, but it is something that eventually took their life from them
Yeah.
emotionally, mentally, and in the end, yes,
Right.
Chloe, they live with PTSD
Yeah.
and their families suffer through that with them.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So, yeah, I definitely think we need to remember those fallen soldiers too.
Mhm.
And I think a great thing to do is get the opportunity to ask some of your
Mhm.
uh, the men you know, the women you know that are in the military now, ask them
Mhm.
about their buddies or veterans.
Right.
Ask them about, tell me about your time there. And even if they don't want to talk to the about the battle, maybe it might help them because
Mhm.
sometimes it helps to be able to talk about the
Yes,
one you lost
that's true.
and tell me about them, what kind of person they were. You don't have to
Yeah.
tell me about how they died or what they, but tell me what kind of
Yeah.
person they were.
That's right. That's right.
That would be so wonderful.
Mhm.
I remember, and I think I told you this before, Rodney, but I remember talking to a man in our church one
Mhm.
day, and I'm not even certain how we got on this topic, but I think we were talking about events that were so, um,
Mhm. Traumatizing?
traumatizing or had such an impact on us as a
Right.
nation that
Right.
when the news came out, everyone remembered where you were and what you were doing when you heard
Right.
the news.
That's right.
And I told him that I had been teaching a Sunday school class, and I said, for me, that happened when Kennedy was assassinated. I was about
Mm.
7, 8 years old, something like that.
Mhm.
And I remember all of a sudden every adult around me was looking very somber. Some of them were crying. No one was talking. And I thought, what has happened that
Right.
all the adults in my world are so shook?
Right.
And then, of
Right.
course, I found out what it was, and I thought, I'll never forget where I was when I heard,
Mhm.
and and what the whole situation was. But I said that to the girls in my Sunday school class who were at the time, I think, seventh graders, and this was like back in the 1980s. And of
Mhm.
course, none of them had been alive at that time, so they looked at me like, don't remember that. No, and they had not
Right.
been through anything. I was
Right.
trying to relate to them to that feeling of when something happens that is of such import and impact that
Mhm.
everybody remembers it, remembers what they were doing. And I asked them, "What is that for you?" And they just stared at me blank, like, there hadn't anything happened in their lifetimes
Oh,
at that
I
point.
rem
And I'm
I
telling
rem
this to a man in the
Mhm.
church,
Mhm.
and the man at church says, "So," I asked him. I said, "So, did
What did
you
you
have
remember?
something like that in your life?" Because I'm
Mhm.
thinking of my mom and dad who had told me, "Oh, for us, that was Pearl Harbor."
Right.
When
Right.
the attack on Pearl Harbor came and we all heard about it, we all remember where we were, what we were doing when
Mhm.
we heard the news about that. And I asked this guy at church, and he said it was Pearl Harbor. And I said, "So where were you and what were you doing when you got the news?" And he said, "I was there." I was like,
Mhm.
"What? You were there?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, I want to hear about that." And he said,
Mhm.
"It's hard to talk about." And I said, "I'm sorry." I said, "So after Pearl Harbor, what was your reaction to it? Where did you go? What did you do?" I said, "So I'm
Mhm.
assuming you were a soldier there." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "So where did you go after Pearl Harbor?" And he said, "I never left Pearl Harbor. The entire war, I stayed in Pearl Harbor." He said,
Wow.
"There so many of us died there that there were very few of us left." And they were like, "No, the ones that are left, you at least know the area and the situation here, and so we're not letting you go because we can't deplete the force here even further." So he spent the entire war there. And I
Recovery,
asked him
doing
to
recovery.
yeah, yeah. And so I asked him, "So tell me what you did." And he said, "Well, the first thing I remember," he said, "I was on he said, "I was guarding the, a capsized ship."
Wow.
And he said, I was not supposed to let anybody get to it, come to it or anything. And I said, now, why would you need to guard a capsized ship? And he said, because there were still people alive inside and they were banging on the hull with wrenches, hoping
Wow.
somebody would come. He said, but the ship was so unstable. There was so much oil in the water
Right.
and fuel. He said that
Wow.
it had all been assessed, and they said, we can't try to cut through the hull because if we do,
It started a fire.
just trying to do that might kill the people who were trying to do it because the sparks would ignite the oil or the ship might shift and then, and we'd end
Yeah.
up killing the people who's trying. So we can't even rescue them and we can't
Wow.
let anyone try to rescue them. And so he said, I stood guard duty and listened all night long to them tapping on the hull. And he said, and every day for days until finally it stopped.
Wow.
I could not imagine. I could not even imagine. And I
Yeah.
understood, but I also
Wow.
understood that's why they had to have somebody on guard duty because every red blooded American wanted to go and try and save them,
Wow.
and
I mean,
rightly so. I would be the same way.
yeah, it's it, no one knows of these are stories like that many
Mhm,
people they see the Pearl Harbor, but they don't know the real intricate stories like that. And I
mhm,
mean, and when you talk to a veteran and you hear about the pe you know the men and women who are still missing in action, the MIAs. And
mhm,
I remember I was at a American Legion, and it was an event, and there was this table, this beautiful table, and there was a place setting there, and I was like, I asked someone, I said, who's gonna sit at that table? And they said, oh, that's
mhm,
the table for the missing. And I said, you
mhm,
guys have a table that is set? He goes, we always have a table there. And I said, it hit me so hard. I was like, wow. I didn't know that, because I hadn't been in the service, and I didn't really know about that
mhm,
observance. And when I saw that, I said, this is so, you know, it just gave me a renewed understanding of and
mhm.
faith in our military. Because when I saw that, I said, it's true. Some of those men and women are still, they left, and their families are wondering whatever happened to them.
Mhm,
Where are they? Were they ever, so very
mhm,
powerful truths. I mean, these are something that we can't get away from. And
mhm.
you wonder, how some of these people are, and did they
Yeah,
escape or
yeah.
whatever, and how, it's amazing.
Mhm. That man who told me that story, he
Mhm.
himself has passed away now, of
Right.
course.
Right,
He
right,
didn't
right.
die on the battlefield, but he took that memory with him. Can you imagine living with that
Into your
your whole
80s
life?
and 90s, 80, some are in 80s and 90
Mhm,
years old, and they remember
mhm,
this, and I'm like, can you imagine having these memories and these images and things like that
mhm.
all your life? Because a lot of these men were there when they were just 17, 18 years old, and they
Yes.
had to go their whole entire life carrying these
Mhm,
images, the sounds, and a lot of times, even when you start getting around 4th of July, I had a friend, and I was actually in a restaurant one time, 4th of July, and and it wasn't funny at all. I'm eating. It was just earlier in the daytime, and I was grabbing a quick snack, and I was gonna eat later, and somebody let off a big firework outside.
mhm,
Boom!
mhm,
This guy dove on the floor and started screaming, "Incoming." And I said, "This guy's being, kidding around." And in a few minutes, I said, this guy is serious. And I mean, he was traumatized. And I thought to myself, I said, that was real. And they, people gathered around him and got him up and told him it was going to be okay. And I'm eating and I was thinking, let me see if this thing is going to, and I'm thinking I'm being, that I'm in the middle of some kind of spoof or something. And I realized that was real. That man literally thought we were under attack. And to see that man hit the floor in a restaurant and scramble under the table and start screaming incoming, I thought, wow.
Yeah.
That was real. And I was like, so it became this whole thing that the whole restaurant just sat down. Everybody was like, wow. Everybody was touched by this whole thing. And I was like, wow. So it makes you really think about people who have been so traumatized. I was like, oh man.
Yeah. Yeah. And it helps you understand what they're going through and why some of them just can't take it anymore. And they
Right.
end
They
up
just
taking their
can't.
lives.
And the 4th of July. And a lot of people, it's beautiful to see the fireworks. And so we have to be understanding. If you're speaking to a veteran, you should ask, are you okay with fireworks? Do you have a problem with it? Because some people think that everybody's okay and they're not, because that really triggers some hard memories for them.
It does. It does. And I have mixed feelings about the fireworks. Now, Carrie is saying she thinks they need to ban fireworks for their love of our vets and our animals. I have empathy for that position. I don't know that I can quite bring myself to go that far because I also know the history of why we have fireworks particularly on the 4th of July. And that started because there were, I think, back during the revolution, I'm going to have to go back and look this up in particular, but there had been some threats made by the British king against the colonies. And one of the things in particular that they had said was, you're not going to assemble anymore. We're not going to allow you to assemble with each other. That's how we're going to tamp down you being able to collude and fight against us. So there's not going to be any more assemblies. And the Americans' response to that was, and it was under threat, if we find you assembling, we're going to arrest you all and you'll be hung.
Wow.
So the Americans' response to that, particularly on the 4th of July, because that was when they had declared their independence. So the next year when it came around, they said, okay, here's our response to the British government. Not only are we assembling, but we're going to help you find us. And they literally set off fireworks to say, here we are, come and get us.
Wow.
Okay. So I was like, I understand now why fireworks are a part of, because I wondered, how did that even get to be a part of our celebration? But, I looked it up and that was the reason. So
I have to tell you, I was in Long Beach. Well, Long Beach is special, but Long Beach, California. And there was a time, and I understand fireworks. Let me tell you, I was on my balcony overlooking the city, and I have never seen private fireworks as big as they had. And I've thought to myself, they're in, they say certain fireworks that fly and projectiles they shouldn't have. I mean, across over 45 city blocks, maybe 3 miles out, because I was high enough to see. And I looked at those fireworks and it was like every street was trying to outdo, or every neighborhood was trying to outdo the next neighborhood. And I was like, oh no, it looked like a war zone.
Yeah.
And the fireworks were so huge. And I'm like, who has fireworks that big? I mean, And I'm like,
Mhm.
but oh my goodness, if I pull up the story last year, oh my goodness, this guy had or people, I don't know who it was, but they had fireworks at this house. It blew the whole house down. It just completely blew the house into toothpicks, literally. And the whole neighborhood was shook. And I mean, sadly, the people in the house died, but they had a huge fireworks cache in this house. And
Mhm.
apparently the thing,
Mm.
it was either unstable, there was some kind of spark,
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
blew that whole house up. And you start to think, you know, we all, I mean, here in California, there's so many venues that have, you know,
Mhm.
stadiums where you can go. And you know, that's what
Mhm.
people are trying to figure out, you know, should individuals have them? And then not to mention people setting people's houses on fire because these
Mhm.
projectiles land on people's roofs and there's
Well, and so
fire.
many people getting injured every year because they don't really know how to do these fireworks. They
Oh
don't,
no.
they don't even I've seen a lot of people shoot off fireworks, they don't even have a bucket of water nearby.
Mm-mm,
And I'm
no.
like, no, you need to have that bucket of water nearby." And to
And they
them,
should
"Oh, well,
let
we've always done this and there's no problem." And then,
and
one of
or
them
have
ends up
adults.
exploding too soon, or it doesn't go up in the air, it starts spiraling or shooting off to the side or whatever.
Right.
So, yeah, I think one thing that we need to, consider for
Mhm.
sure is if we're gonna have fireworks, make it only at, public locations where you can go as a public to enjoy a stadium,
Mhm.
whatever, to enjoy the fireworks. That way,
Mhm.
if you don't wanna be around it, you can make sure you're not,
Well,
you can be
and
somewhere else.
Chloe was making a point about the dogs because, I mean, the one thing about it,
Mhm,
I have a friend, James Andrew, he's been on the show before, and every year, I mean, 4th of July, he had literally, well, out here in California, they start shooting off fireworks in June. I mean,
mhm.
I already hear fireworks going off now. So people have
Yeah.
already got them, and I'm thinking, okay, and sadly, a lot of the really hardcore fireworks are coming out of they're illegal and they're coming in from and they
Mhm,
get shipments in and stuff. But the thing is, he literally has to put his dog in the car and kind of turn his radio on and go for a drive and take his dog, and he's constantly pet and he'll drive for hours. He literally will
mhm,
drive out a half a tank of gas because if you sit in the house, your dog is just like this the whole
mhm,
time. And
mhm.
so I'm like, ooh, you know, and now I have a new puppy, so
Mhm.
this will be my first 4th of July with a puppy. So I've got to figure out maybe that would be an incredible idea I just came up with a business model. Came up with a real incredible business model. Thank you, Lord. Actually, for pets for the holidays.
Oh, well, don't say it out loud right here because
I
you
won't.
wanna hold on to that.
I have to
But
keep that on
my
my
brain's
jaws.
now already going in that direction. Oh, that's a good idea. But
Yeah.
that's the direction I was thinking of, was if we only had it where,
Mhm.
like, each city, like, if they're bigger cities, you might say, like,
Uh-huh.
"Okay, it's gonna be in these 2 stadiums and in this location."
Mhm.
And, therefore, it's convenient to people who wanna go watch it,
Mhm.
witness it. But if you live near that,
Mhm.
then just go to a different part of the city. You don't even have to go out of the city. Just go to a different
Right.
part where you're not gonna hear it, you're not gonna see it, and it's just gonna be for this certain time,
You
and
gotta do
and then
some
it's
serious
over.
ride. You gotta do some
Mhm,
serious riding out here in California. You gotta go like you out you would have to go almost to Barstow. Literally,
mm,
you would have to go way, way or start driving like you going up towards Santa Barbara or something. I mean,
mhm.
and yeah, yeah. That I mean,
Yeah.
and I have
So I
seen
think that would be worthwhile then, because then the citizens who wanna participate in it can, and the ones who, "No, my dog hates that. My cat hates that. I hate that. I had an aunt who couldn't handle it. And she
Yeah.
stayed home every 4th of July rather than go to the family barbecue. And
Right.
our family didn't even do fireworks of any kind,
Well,
but
yeah.
she knew the neighbors might. And
Right.
she never knew what she was going to encounter. So she just preferred to stay home. And, she closed all the blinds and she turned on, I think she would play the radio or something. She would do something to drown out any of those noises because it made her very nervous.
Maybe
So,
before we come up on the 4th of July, me and you, we should do a show, of things, that could even help our little, furry friends and
yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah.
So that might
I
be
think that
maybe
would be
we'll
a good idea.
and get someone on who's qualified from SPCA or something like that, pet
Mhm,
organization. Maybe
mhm.
we'll have to do a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
research. Wow.
So let's circle back around though. We were
Yeah.
talking earlier about what is it that our military, our fallen military, what freedoms were they fighting for? So, and I think that the national naturalization test,
Mhm.
the
Okay.
citizenship test that they have to take is, gives us some answers right there. So, one
Uh-huh.
thing I want to ask, because this was I was looking through the textbook that
Uh-huh.
they give people who want to become naturalized citizens, and there are some things in there are in bold type, and they let them know right up front if it's in bold type, it's a question on the test. You
Okay.
know, so and then there's an index at the end that puts together all the questions on the test.
Oh, okay.
So I want to ask you the first one.
Uh-oh.
See if you can, and this is for you and our viewers out there. Put it
Viewers.
in the comments if you know the answer. Who governs the United States of America?
Ooh.
Who governs the United States of America? Of America.
Wow, that's a good question.
Mhm.
Okay, let's see if any of our who governs the United States of America.
Anybody know out there? There you go. Carrie's got it. It's right there in the first 3 words in the preamble to the Constitution. We the
The
people.
people.
That's what they're fighting for, our
We the
right to be
people.
self-governing. And
Okay.
part of the way we're self-governing, it's not just, dictating to yourself how you're gonna govern yourself,
We the people.
but it's also we elect representatives who represent us
Mhm.
so that it is the government of the people, by the people, for the
For the
people,
people, right. For the people.
as Lincoln had said. So, and
Mhm.
you remember the preamble to the Constitution. This is probably the only thing that I
Mhm.
came away from 8th grade history and government and
Mhm.
history in 8th grade.
Mhm.
Still being able to remember is our 8th grade teacher made us memorize the preamble to the Constitution.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah,
I
and I
remember.
can still say it. So
Okay.
this was one when I saw this question, I thought, who, as if there's one person, and I'm thinking of all the things I learned. Well, there's 3 branches of government, and there's this, and then I remembered, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union,
Mhm.
establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
Yay.
Mhm.
Bravo, bravo.
Yay! So, but I loved that she made us learn that
Mhm.
because later when I started thinking about our government and what it
Mhm.
means and how it runs and what was the purpose of it, it's all right there in the
Mhm.
preamble. It gives us a clue already. And the Constitution wasn't written till what I think it was 1789. It wasn't ratified till 1789. So
Mm.
many years after the Declaration. So they
Mhm.
were hammering out this Constitution, but in that Constitution, in the preamble to it, you
Mhm.
already know here's what their aim was, you
Right.
know? And even if they didn't have all the articles lined up yet, they already knew
You were
what they
working
were
on it.
aiming at.
The
And they were
framework.
aiming at, yeah,
Yeah.
the framework for it. And they were like, here's what we want the government to do. We want it to, provide for a common defense. We want it to promote the general welfare of all of us.
Mhm.
We want our government to secure the blessings of liberty
Mhm.
to ourselves and to our posterity, to the people who come after us, to make sure that freedom is always the rule of the land. And that's
Yeah.
another question that's um, in the test is what is the rule of law? What does that mean?
Right.
What is the supreme law of the land? How about
Right.
that?
No, I'm just
Anybody know?
I mean, I was just thinking about me. It just some weird popped in my head because it was that what you were saying was funny. I was just thinking about how Mel Brooks would, Mel Brooks. He's such a crazy guy, and I was thinking about him as a producer and what he would think about that kind of stuff and how he would probably twist that. But anyway, um, yeah, you're right, and it's, but again, we have so many things that, and you wonder how far have we come from that? How
Mm,
far, how far have we come from that original plan, and
mhm,
also too, how much consideration was built in that for all people.
mhm,
I understand because at that time when they was making them rules, that it was a little bit different. Yeah, and so
mhm.
and things did not kind of pan out until a little, years and years and years later. But and yeah, it's a lot when you start thinking about the establishment of the United States and what it meant for and
Mhm.
all of that. But well, we're still here, and that's the whole thing. The
Yeah,
point is,
yeah.
yeah, we had some tweaking to do and some rights
Mhm,
things that we
mhm.
had to get straightened out a little bit and kind of
Yeah,
sort of. But the whole thing is, we're still here. But I think the
mhm.
biggest, greatest concern that we really need, I think we need a huge, serious campaign to continue to remember that we are American.
Yes.
We are America. We are Americans. We are supposed to be together. Those who are here
Mhm,
rightfully and, who are about the American way. And I really believe in that. I think that,
mhm.
made in America, we need to get back to that. We need to get back to
Yes.
producing quality products, putting our people to work. I
Mhm,
think that, don't get me wrong, I like automation. I think automation has a place, but it's, there's a lot of people who are not
mhm.
ready to be downsized yet, and they are not knowledgeable about, well, if you take my job away and you give it to this machine, what about me? And
Mhm.
so people, and as I heard someone talking to me the other day, we need to get very, very serious. If you are a young person, if you are a older adult, if you are a senior citizen, you need to start studying about AI and how
Mhm.
it could benefit you. Because
Mhm.
if you don't and things start to automate, you do not want to be left behind.
That's so
And that
true.
is something that needs to be in the school system, the community
Mhm.
centers, the senior centers, the veteran centers for our veterans, because
Mhm.
I knew a guy who was a vet and I helped him get housing, and he was displaced from his DD 214. That's your paperwork that says I was an honorably discharged veteran and I served honorably. That's your
Mhm.
DD 214. He didn't know where his DD 214 was. And for him to get on the computer, he was like, I ain't got time to, because he was old school. I hate
Mhm.
computers. And I was like, whoa, 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 man, you need to get online. I need to help you get online so you can find this. And so through trial and error, and it wasn't through him, it was through me finding somebody else that could help me who knew
Mhm.
these things and where to go to get him reconnected to the VA so he could get his DD 214, which is the first step to getting health care
Mhm.
and,
Mhm.
and psychological care and
Yeah.
housing. So,
Yeah.
man, and so that's part of the Rippey Foundation. Whoop, the Rippey Foundation. I'm going to
Mhm.
work with at-risk youth, senior citizens, and veterans. And I have some specific things for veterans that, because having helped him, I saw these things and I'm like, I don't need to do the big things that the VA and all these other huge organizations are doing for veterans. It's the niche services that are in between the big time, from the need to the services.
Mhm.
There's some little things in between that veterans need, and not only veterans, senior citizens,
Mhm.
and our youth.
Mhm.
So thinking about that.
Yeah. One thing I like about what you just said, Rodney, it really got me thinking about how, um, I guess I would say unresponsive the education system in our country has been for years.
Right.
And honestly, I think it has to do with the fact that the government was running it because the wheels of government turn very slowly. And unfortunately, that meant that as things changed in our everyday lives, in the
Hmm.
marketplace, in the business place, education didn't catch up for sometimes over a generation.
Right.
Think how long it took before they actually started teaching in schools. They started teaching kids how to write a check.
Right. Well,
You
see,
know, that
I've
didn't
got
start happening until the late 80s or the 90s.
they don't even
How
teach
long had
kids
we
that.
been using checks?
Well, think
You know,
about this. They don't even teach kids home ec anymore. So that I'm with a
there you
group of
go.
people. We're trying to bring back those vocational trades and things
Mhm.
because, okay, first of all, when you talk about tradesmen, men and women working in
Mhm.
electrical, HVAC,
Mhm.
mechanics, and things like that, plumbers, the generation who are really good at it and own their own business, these guys and girls are senior citizens. They're getting ready to retire. When this crop of people, these technicians, quit and they say, I'm gonna retire, who's gonna do woodworking? Who's gonna make
Mhm.
real oak cabinets and things like that?
Mhm.
These young people don't know how to run a lathe. They don't know how to run a
Mhm.
saw machine, a bandsaw, and all this type of stuff. So we have to bring back these core opportunities at the late elementary school level
Mhm.
to definitely the high schools, because some kids are never going to go to college, but they need to have a skill set so that they can
Yes.
have a
Yes.
livable wage. And a livable wage, some people say, well, what is a livable wage? Well, a livable wage out here in California is different than it is in some
Mhm.
cities. So it's and it's getting
Mhm.
expensive all around the nation because people are leaving other places and they're migrating to the South. And when they
Mhm.
come, they're cash heavy and the properties get bigger and the property values go up. And even people in Alabama are starting to see the prices go up. They go,
Yes.
did you see that house? Did you see the price on that house?
Mhm.
You know?
I'm already seeing that now, Rodney, 'cause, for the last 3 years in the row, the city I live in had been named the number 1 place to live and raise a family, the best place to live and raise a family
Wow.
nationwide.
Nice.
Nationwide. It was the
I'm
number 1
coming.
place.
I'm gonna be your neighbor.
This year
Just kidding.
this year, it not only fell out of 1st place, it didn't
Uh-huh.
even make the rank in the state of Alabama.
Gee, that's
And the
terrible.
reason is it has, the growth here has
Mhm.
been exponential. There have been people coming from so many other places. The influx is so great. There is apartment buildings going up everywhere trying to house people who are coming here. And the infrastructure was not ready for that. And now all of a sudden it's not such a great place to live because we're overpopulated and underserved. the infrastructure just isn't there.
Well,
So,
out here in California, the fire just displaced about 20,000 families.
mm,
So because of these fires and all of these structures being gone,
mhm,
and especially the sad part of it, these people were there years and years and years ago, before these communities had these financial booms and before the value shot through the ceiling. Somebody, especially Pacific Palisades, I can't forget our people in Altadena. Altadena, truthfully, just so you know, and this is a big problem that's going on, Altadena was kind of a mecca of wealthy African Americans that for some weird reason, they weren't in Beverly Hills, they weren't in Hollywood, they were in Altadena. That
mhm,
fire raced through Altadena and burned out many well-to-do people. And the problem is the people in Pacific Palisades are all nationalities,
mhm,
Asian, white, foreign, from foreign people from
mhm,
all around the world. Were right there overlooking the ocean, beautiful houses, underinsured, had no insurance. And
mhm,
so now the problem and the question becomes, how do I rebuild this beautiful home? And it's going to cost hundreds of thousands, $1 million to,
mhm,
first of all, clean, make sure everything is proper, make sure the
mhm,
ground is ready. There's no chemicals and stuff like that.
mhm,
Permits, build. So the time lag is years off, and so now that's a big problem. And people are like, I don't want an apartment complex in the middle of our old neighborhood. We don't want. And now the sad part of it is there are opportunistic people who are
mhm,
cash heavy coming in and go, well, I'll buy your property for a couple 100,000. And people like, well, what choices do I have? You know? And so people are gobbling up plots
mhm,
of land, and people are wondering, will this thing gentrify? Is it going to
mhm.
change our city forever? And so many people are so torn. And I'm like, so I feel for so many people who had the losses during this recent fire. And I'm
Mhm,
hoping that they come up with a real solution, because this thing is going to get bad. And
mhm.
you think about families who lost so much, and I have a lot of friends who lost their homes and pets, and I mean, and it's really sad. It's really, really sad.
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
know.
it is. And I feel you, Carrie. Carrie's saying, "I'm so mad at California for this."
Yeah. Yeah, I
But
understand.
yeah, yeah,
So,
we're feeling the same way. I just looked at the time. I can't believe we're past
well,
our hour
before
already.
before we go, I want to ask you a question. You threw me a question.
Okay. All right, sure.
Do you have to do the real ID in your city?
Yes. Yes,
Aha.
we do.
Okay, people. Well, I went to the DMV, Department of Motor
Mhm,
Vehicles, and I have the checkoff list. So it says, um, in order for you to have, to get a real ID, and you need to hustle and get down to the doggone DMV, um,
mhm,
you cannot have you think documents that you have to have in order to get this. You have to have a birth certificate from the United States or U.S. Treasury, abbreviated or abstract certificates will not be accepted. So copies of a birth certificate will not be accepted. U.S. certificate or a consular report of birth abroad. Um, you got to have a unexpired foreign passport. You got to have an unexpired U.S. passport or passport card. Um, you got to have your visa or approved I-94 form, certificate of naturalization or citizenship. You have to have a valid, unexpired permanent resident card, a unexpired employment authorization document, EAD card, I I-766 or valid expired EAD card with a notice of action, or an unexpired permanent resident card, valid expired permanent resident card with a note of action, meaning that you're going to fix it or you're in the process of fixing it. So make sure you go to your Department of Motor Vehicle people and ask them, what must I do? Because you do not need to try to take an airplane flight and get to the airport and you can't travel. Because if you do not have a real ID, they'll say, I'm sorry, your driver's license is not good enough. It's not a real ID. You can get stuck. So make sure you go get your real ID. And I think there's there is a time to do this. And there you go. You can see it, people. Real ID. This is real ID. There you go. Real ID.
Yeah, and if you're wondering whether you have it or not, look at your driver's license. If it's got that star on it, then you have it. Right. And if it doesn't, you don't.
Right. So make sure you go get that. What a wonderful show. Thank you very much. Happy Memorial Day for everybody out there. God bless you. And Nina, I know don't want to stay too long, but let you close them out.
Well, goodbye, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. It was fun to get to chat with you for a while, and you too, Rodney. And as always, y'all be of good courage. God is with us, and we aren't alone. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. God bless all the families and all of our veterans. God bless you, and have a great Memorial Day.